Amazing, amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Tyler Green. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We're going to start the show. In June 2006, the Black Brooklyn Empowerment Convention brought together over 1,000 community leaders and residents representing Central Brooklyn to address the alarming disparities in education, employment, health, housing, and quality of life that impact a large segment of Central Brooklyn residents. The education cluster of the convention concluded that the most pressing challenge facing Brooklyn's public schools is ensuring that all its children meet the standards needed to live, learn, work, communicate, and be productive citizens in their community and the world community. Although there have been some educational, economic, and social gains for the borough's Black population as a whole, it is equally clear that progress towards educational parity for most of Central Brooklyn students of African descent has slowed and in many cases come to a complete halt. Regardless of this reality, education remains the most effective road to success. Removing the barriers that prevent students of African descent from accessing a high quality public education is an essential first step to achieving success and access to the economic, social, and political resources that are needed to support strong families and a truly democratic society. A major recommendation that was ratified during the convention was the need for an organized and independent effort to address the school achievement disparities that exist for Central Brooklyn students of color. This recommendation led to the formation of the Adelaide Sanford Institute, ASI. ASI honors the life and work of the nationally recognized educator, Vice Chancellor Emerita, Board of Regents University of the State of New York, Dr. Adelaide L. Sanford. And next we move on to Juan Colon, who's going to share some data that's going to set the context to the state of urgency that we'll be referring to today.
Thank you so much. And hopefully everybody can see my screen at this moment. All right. Can everybody hear me? So thank you for this opportunity to provide some context where the work is going to occur, where the social emotional work, social emotional learning work occurs, and also culture responsive education as well. So first step, we're going to look at Brooklyn. Brooklyn has 2.6 million people. Citywide, we're looking at 8.3 million people. In terms of school districts, New York City has the largest school district in the United States, with roughly 1 million students. And if we further look at the data in terms of racial composition, we could see here that these are the three of the, well, I have 5 groups here that comes from the US Census, 3 different academic school years. This will be uploaded. Now, if we look at Central Brooklyn, the 7 districts that I was asked to focus on for this contextual piece, we see the diversity here. What's important to know is that when we say, for example, Asian or Black, we're talking about still within that subgroups that are also extremely diverse. We have Asian students from Pakistan, India, China. We have Black students from the Caribbean, from the United States, from the South, from Africa, Hispanic students of all backgrounds. So the diversity of it all, where this work is going to occur, is important. Students with disabilities, you can see the numbers here as well, broken down by districts. English language learners, this resource will be shared along with its sources. When we look at the citywide numbers compared to each district, we see how it's broken down. In terms of poverty, also very important to notice. Why? Because just understanding all this allows us to continue to plan for the type of work that we're engaged in. Why is this important? Because at the same time we have these numbers, we also have something that's extremely important to look at. We're looking at the teacher turnover rates in terms of 5 years. And we also have that broken down by district. It's important for the times that we're in, and I use the word digitality, because currently, if we look at schools that have high minority populations, meaning 75% of the student population is non-white, we're looking at 63% of such schools are 100% remote, fully remote. And why is this important to know? Because this is the situation, this is the context where we're going to be doing our work, where we have been doing our work. Connecting this to what's necessary for instruction during these times, we have some more information here. Brooklyn, New York, out of the 5 boroughs, ranks number 3 when it comes to households without internet. 15.7% of the households in Brooklyn don't have access to the internet. And there you have a map of the 5 boroughs. Bronx is number 1, Staten Island number 2, Brooklyn number 3. When we further stratify by income, 20 with households with incomes less of $20,000 or less, we rank number 3 as well, 37.6%. Also, once again, connected to households without income. There's the map right here. When it comes to children, which is really, households provide the children that we teach and we learn with, Brooklyn ranks number 1, 14.4%. And this is the most recent data, which comes from the year 2019. 14.4% of households' children do not have internet as of 2019. And we have the map right there. As you can see the difference between Brooklyn and Staten Island, for example. It's pretty large. When it comes to those numbers, taking that percentage and putting it into a number, we're looking at 83,309 children who, according to the most recent data, do not have access to the internet, which is today necessary to learn and to engage. This directly correlates with, I believe, with productivity. In other words, how is it that students are completing work, and how can we as educators, as teachers, as people engaged in the education of our people, how can we address this moving forward? How can we be culturally relevant? How can we be engage in social emotional learning within this particular context? The main takeaway for today is that, yes, we do have to step it up, all of us, and understand the context that we are embedded in, and understand the background, understand the numbers. And once again, this resource will be shared with everyone. And this is something that you could take back to your schools, take back to your communities of practice, and look at it, discuss it, and always remember that from data, we go to information, from information to knowledge, and hopefully knowledge to wisdom. Let's not keep it at the data and information level. Let's elevate it. Thank you so much. These are the resources, and I'll now pass it forward.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you very much for sharing that data and helping us set a context. I'm jumping back on real quick to mention a couple of things that I didn't before. Down at the bottom, we have webinar functions. We have a Q&A that's open. So anyone who wants to, or any attendees that want to ask a question, please submit it into the Q&A and not the chat, because we'll be monitoring the Q&A closely. And as well as today's agenda, we will get into a little bit of everything. It's a program. We're going to have a bit of history. We're going to go into theory behind culturally responsive education, social emotional learning, what they mean, clarifying those terms, as well as hearing from practitioners who are using tools and strategies that implement these practices that you can also share if you're a practitioner. So today's focus is being solution-oriented and moving forward and taking from our past to help propel us into a greater future. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it off to Majida Abdul Karim, who's going to share today's Sankofa story.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we indulge in our Sankofa stories, which means we will go back before we move forward, I would like to articulate something to the viewing audience in the spirit of our spoken word. We are not slaves. We were not slaves. We were enslaved, a stolen people placed into a new land, captured, controlled, and colonized. We fought back. Our revolts looked like different things at different times, from Quilombos and Booker T, from learning to read in secrecy, to Zaunt, to Prasa, liberation trails masked, determined to delude piled upon our heads with the seeming acquaintance of delightful designs, quilts etched with freedom pathways to help those know how to get there. From Du Bois to Denmark to VC to protest slogans and picket lines, policy changes and melanized principles in the building on the front line. David Walker and Marcus Garvey, Bethune-Cookman and Garrett, the great mind, two Nile River Valley systems, Septima to Dr. Adelaide Lavinia Sanford, the queen mother of our time. So that was our intro for delving into our Sankofa stories. And if I can have access to share the screen, that would be delightful. Thank you. And so we have our beloved Dr. Adelaide Sanford, for whom our organization is named after. And we know that before we move into our present, we must first delve into our past. Now, we hear a lot about culturally responsive pedagogy, culturally relevant pedagogy, and culturally sustainable pedagogy. But I think it's imperative that our students, our teachers, our school systems look at the contributions of African people before we look into our present. If we know about Egypt, we know that we had writing systems that dated back to 2400 BC that were vertical as well as horizontal. If you have writing systems, you know you have a literate society. We've heard of Harvard and Cornell and Yale and all of these schools. 900 years before that, there was Sankore University, which taught physics, algebra, linguistics, geology, zoology, anthropology. Do our students know about Sankore University that was located in Western Africa near the Nile River and sustained three empires, the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire, and the Songhai Empire? So when we look at this narrative, and this is a narrative which is repetitive, but when they stole us, when they robbed our land, of our people know that they brought to the Americas a skilled people. We also know that when we look at the enslavement of our people, this is not the single narrative. So we need to go back to antiquity, go back to Kemet, and go back to the scholarship that rings true within our historical narrative. Now, let's look at our literal narrative in terms of our propagation in prose for emancipation and freedom. Some of us might have heard of David Walker's Appeal. It was a preamble that he dedicated to the colored citizens of the world, that in particular, the very expressly to those of the United States of America. So he knew enslavement was just not about the United States proper, it expanded. And in David Walker's Appeal, he poignantly stated that we shall take our freedom by any means necessary. His message was not palatable for those who were aligned to the anti-slavery movement. His philosophy was touch me and be terminated. I had to make that big. Because David Walker's Appeal got wide viewership, it spread to Virginia and Louisiana, as well as Savannah, Georgia. When it came out 10 years later, there were anti-literacy laws. And I don't know if you can see this, but I'll read it really quickly. In Virginia, should Negroes or their children assemble at a school to learn reading or writing, or any justice of the peace may dismiss the school with 20 stripes on the back of every pupil. That was in Virginia. In Louisiana, they said the penalty for instructing a free Black in a Sunday school is the first offense, $500. For the second offense, it was death. One may ask, you know, we have all this scholarship and this liberation in literature. Where did this come from? There were literary societies that were set up as early as the 1700s. And in these literary societies, some were called free African societies, where they would study rhetoric, they would study speech, they would study reading and teach reading to communities of color, so that this issue of literacy had a direct link to the advocacy of liberation. I have this picture up really quickly because many of us have read the July 4th letter written by Frederick Douglass. Know that Benjamin Banneker wrote an amazing letter to Thomas Jefferson, who was at that time Secretary of State in 1789, petitioning for the freedom of enslaved Africans in the United States, where he eloquently used text from the Declaration of Independence to expose the hypocrisy that this new America had created. And I highly implore all of our viewers to make sure you read a copy of Benjamin Banneker's letter to Thomas Jefferson. And shout out to everybody at Benjamin Banneker Academy. We know that Phyllis Wheatley lives in the same literary tradition. We take this tradition to schooling for liberation in terms of the one-room schoolhouse. Oftentimes, this was located in community churches, and sometimes it was in secret places, because if one was caught trying or attempting to read, you were massacred on spot. Sister Clara Muhammad, the 1930s. Many have heard about the Nation of Islam. When she became a Muslim, she decided not to send her children to public school, and she was harassed, also threatened with jail time. Why did she opt not to send her children to public school? Because there were readers that looked like this. And guess who's in the bullseye? A little Black boy. So she decided to teach her children at home. This is an unknown story, but she is truly the foremother, one of the foremothers of homeschooling in the United States of America. This homeschool turned into 47 independent Black schools within the United States, from the time of 1932 to 1974. It was called the Muhammad University of Islamic System. Now these have been transformed to Sister Clara Muhammad schools, and they still exist. Septima Clark, mother of the movement. Why is she called mother of the movement? Again, Septima Clark was a teacher. She was a teacher for 40 years. She's originally from Charleston, South Carolina. She was fired because in 1953, they passed the law stating that any public servant that was aligned to any civil rights organization had to be fired. She refused to give up her civic engagement, and so she was fired from her job and she lost her pension. What happened? She began to organize and galvanize. What did that look like? Educating adults in terms of reading and also responsibility with civic engagement. It is through the hands of Septima Clark that over 700,000 African Americans registered to vote. She created something called the citizenship schools that trained 10,000 teachers. Quickly, I'm just going to point this out because I know we are pressed for time. If we look at this in terms of the activities in the classroom, we see that literacy was one, but see, it was literacy for empowerment, not literacy just to read, literacy for liberation, voter registration, Negro history, government, American history, information about the freedom movement, citizenship rights, how to send telegrams, file your income tax. These were things that our brothers and sisters in the South needed in terms of community activism, okay? Educate you about housing, recruit students from freedom schools, and we'll talk a little bit more about freedom schools very shortly. She understood too, from state to state, there were different laws. All states didn't necessarily have the poll tax. Louisiana did. So before we got this term differentiation, she would differentiate her instruction according to the ammunition that you needed to educate yourself about how to combat the repressive systems around us. And we're still fighting. If you see this sign, it says 20 years later, education can't wait. We got to keep this moving. 1964, quality education still being fought for. Know that in 1964 in New York City, that was one of the largest recorded protests where almost 500,000 Black and brown communities kept their children home because the school system was integrated, but it was unequal. Ocean Hill, Brownsville, fight for community control. We want to give a big shout out to Baba Jitsu Weusi and his children that may be on the line, soldiers in the movement. Once again, this was in New York City and Brooklyn. Junior High School 271, there was a conflict between the United Federation of Teachers, the community and educators that wanted curriculum, that wanted Black and brown teachers, that wanted Black and brown administrators in the school, and they fought this fight to the point where they would go to Black college campuses, recruit students, train them to take the teacher's exam, pass the exam. They partnered with the Ford Foundation as well as Fordham University to get Black administrators in the school. And Dr. Sanford is very, very familiar with this program to have Black administrators. Here are some of these same teachers. You have Al Van, Ali Abdul Kareem, who was my mother. Whoop, whoop. You have Ms. Joan Eastman, and you have Fakisha Kumbo. These two have become ancestors, but clearly their legacy lives on. Here's some of the mans from 271 and all of the other schools in Ocean Hill, Brownsville. Right to hire and fire all principals, assistant principals, the teachers who are not servicing our children. Those who work hard to teach our children are welcome to stay. Those who won't cooperate must and will go. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because we are pressed for time, but you get the essence of where this is going. This was a similar flyer posted in Harlem. These were experiment schools. So it was Brooklyn, it was the east side of Manhattan, and one school was also in Harlem. And the narrative is the same. Unite for a school boycott if the schools do not agree to teach heritage and history. They gotta go. And this is what community control, community power, and community voice looks like. Now, freedom schools started earlier, but I have this here for narrative. You have two conversations that are going on: separation and one about integration and equity, right? So we know we are not a monolith in terms of our roads to freedom. We take different paths, and that's okay. So we had freedom schools that were set up in the South, and then we have freedom schools in the North. You see some of my buddies here. Many of you have heard of Uhuru Sasa Shule Academy in Brooklyn, New York. So we were here to educate, redefine curriculum, empower our babies, give them the lessons so that they can be powerful Black men and women in our society, going back into the historical narrative so they can stand in who they are today. 1994, junior high school 113. That's the year I began to teach at junior high school 113, and I never forgot when I got there. Sometimes when you're the last one or the youngest one or the newest one, you kind of have to fish for what you want to teach your children. And I never forget, I found this book. It was published by Hardcore, and the title was African American Literature. I had students who were struggling. They could barely read and write. At that time, we had the closed exams. And I remember I had a young woman read, and she could barely read, and I couldn't believe it. And I said to myself, because sometimes these are stories that your teacher education program does not tell you. How does someone make it to the 7th grade and they were unable to read? So this book was the books of all books in my classroom with my students. And I began to delve and give them more literature about who they were and from whom they had come from and the legacy of their people. I found that this sense of insecurity and low self-esteem began to give voice to very, very verbose and articulate young people who felt good about themselves. As I saw this transcendent happen, I began to notice that my students also began to improve. And the more you give them, the more they want to get, because something else that we should know is students, unfortunately, who have failed are used to failing. And so we have to shift the narrative and give them examples of their success. Last but not least, and I'm about to end soon, here we have who? A very young brother Malcolm. Many of us celebrated his exit into becoming an ancestor recently. We know that when he got to the 7th grade, he was very excited about becoming a lawyer. And he had a teacher that said, don't become a lawyer, become a carpenter. Now you can imagine, many of us have read the story of what that does to the psycho-spiritual state of a young person, that you're excited about being participatory in your life legacy and lineage and the tracks that you want to set for yourself for somebody to crush and slam your dreams and say, don't do this, do that because you a nigga. This became our beloved Detroit Red, a misguided young man who wound up inside of the penal system, who had seen a lot of death, a lot of torture, a lot of racism, right? While he was incarcerated, El Hajj Malik Shabazz, known as Malcolm X, met a man named Bimby. Bimby was articulate, he was smart, he can carve out, and he was a thought leader in any argument. Malcolm modeled himself after Bimby. He found out that Bimby, again, was in the Nation of Islam and decided that I want to join. one of the processes that takes place is you have to write this letter, right? Malcolm at that time was in the street. He said, what am I going to say? What up, cat daddy? I need to get into your organization. He said, no, I had to write a letter that would articulate that I am brilliant, I am smart, I have a vocabulary. So as we know, he began to read the dictionary and found out, just like I did before I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, that that first word with A is an aardvark. And that person became one of the most prolific, intelligent, critical thinkers and speakers that we know at this time. But wait a minute. Wait, like Malcolm said, the ball is in our hands, dear educators. We can wait for someone to do what we know needs to be done for ourselves, or we can take all of the challenges that we have had and create a new paradigm and shift the narrative to empower our young people so that they never encounter that teacher that told Malcolm, no, you can't be a lawyer, be a carpenter. We can skip the penal system phase. We can create Malcolms one school at a time, and many schools are already doing that. For those who know me know I came up in Community School District 13 that helped to shape and mold me as a young teacher. And now today, speaking to all of us who are members of the Adelaide Louvigno Sanford Institute for the Research and Culture of Students of African Descent, the torch is in our hands to carry. We've been charged. Thank you.
Woo! Majida, lighting that fire. That's what this is about. Thank you, Majida Abdul Kareem, for putting it all in context again and giving us perspective as we continue to move forward, because that's the tone that we want to set. Next up, we're going to get into the theoretical analysis piece of CRE and SEL. Then we have Dr. Cooney Lavage and Dr. Stacey Haley, who are going to now share with us what it really means before we get into the practitioner's piece. Stacey, are we ready?
Sure.
You have a share screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Lavage, you want to go?
I'll go.
Okay.
This Fisher.
Oh, Ms. Fisher is ready?
I was ready.
It's
Yeah.
queued up? It's queued up? All right, so
Yeah.
you know what? Before we get into the theoretical piece, let's hear some student voices. This is Amani Fisher, instructor extraordinaire, who had her students share their perspectives about what engages them. And I think it's always valuable to hear from the students themselves.
Yeah. So here we are, asking the kids some questions about what keeps them engaged, what's happening in school, what we can learn from them. I just did a Flipgrid. I learned how to use a piece of software with my students, and so they are going to share out some things with you.
During this pandemic and remote learning, one thing that keeps me engaged in my classes is when teachers do discussion boards. Discussion boards can be asking a set of questions that we should answer before a class or having a near-pod lesson. This is because the discussion boards allow students to voice their ideas about the class without necessarily having to speak aloud, which can be hard if they are not comfortable. Also, these discussion boards can help the teacher come up with lessons based on the ideas of the students. When lessons are based on questions that students actually have or ideas that students come up with, it can increase student engagement. One thing that makes me want to participate in class discussion is when there is a topic being discussed that I have questions about. This is because I can get my answer while also getting an answer for a student who may have had the same question but did not want to participate. I think the best way for teachers to increase student engagement is to broaden the options for students to share their opinions rather than sharing out in class. This is because not every student is willing to participate aloud, but opening their options will allow everyone to have their voices be heard.
During this pandemic and remote learning, what keeps me engaged
and excited about learning is being able to actively collaborate with my teachers and actively collaborate with my classmates. When I work with my classmates, I am able to get help on materials that I don't understand. Also, having a thoughtful class discussion keeps me engaged. It helps me process information rather than just simply receiving it. Having a thoughtful class discussion helps me practice thinking about the course material. Collaborating with my teachers and classmates and having a thoughtful class discussion gives me, as a student, an opportunity to develop my own interpretation, challenge my initial understanding, raise questions, and help me grow as a critical thinker. Being that things are different, I like teachers who are engaged with students and have a positive and understanding point of view with students. It can be hard to keep students motivated and engaged, but when teachers make it a fun learning environment, it becomes less stressful and easy for us to communicate with each other. Getting in groups and sharing our ideas with others is really helpful and a good way to get us participating. If some students aren't comfortable with asking teachers for help, this gives them a chance to do so. Hello, I'm Kyle Matthias. Two things that I think should be implemented more into the classroom is more ed puzzles and more open discussion. With open discussion, it allows for students who might be confused about the work, that the open discussion allows for students to answer or get answers on any topics that they might be confused about. And with ed puzzles, the certain topics that can't be fully go into depth about in the classroom, the ed puzzles have in-depth videos that go over the topics more slowly at a pace that's comfortable for the students, rather than having to rush through this one topic that students may not fully understand yet.
And
Throughout the
young
course of
people,
remote learning.
So that was just 4 students that I wanted to share out, and a couple will come back. So that was a moment. Students actually got the opportunity to talk about what's keeping them engaged and what are some of the things they enjoy. So that's my piece.
Thank you, thank you. And there'll be a second one later.
Yes,
time
there's a
permitting.
couple others.
Yeah, it's always valuable to hear from the students. Next up, we have Dr. Clooney Lavaz. Are you ready?
Yes.
Thank you, thank you.
I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, hold on.
While Clooney sets that up, I want to remind the audience members that if you have a question, please enter it in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that closely, and then we will have a segment at the end where we will answer those questions. So please feel free to do that.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome.
Good evening.
So I'm just excited to be here and to share along with the esteemed panelists and all of you who are in the queue or in the audience. So CRE or not CRE, there is no question. We can no longer wait for our wait for anyone, as Majida expressed. What we must understand is that a man without history is like a tree without roots, as Frederick Douglass said. And so CRE roots us in culturally responsive education, in which we cannot wait for a mandate. This has to be a must. It is imperative because we have known throughout history and the stories of Sankofa that if we don't know our history, then how can we be our best selves? So therefore, it becomes imperative for our students to have a culturally responsive and relevant education. Sorry. So the question lies in the fact that what is our role and responsibility as educators and educational leaders on impacting the academic achievement of students, particularly African-American and Latinx students. Brother Colon presented us with a series of information and data that I can remember in 2013 being in District 13, and the Schatz Foundation wrote a report that says there were no learning opportunities, and how upset that got me, because I knew where I was and in my surrounding schools in District 13, there were tons of opportunities for students to learn and thrive and be their best selves. And so that sent me on a whirlwind to ask this question as to what we were doing that was right, that was making our students thrive. And it stemmed from the idea that educators within District 13 were doing what they needed to do to provide our students with access and opportunities, especially our Black and Brown students, for which Brother Colon presented the data, in which we predominantly in Central Brooklyn make up close to 75% of Black and Latinx students within our districts in Central Brooklyn. So it's all stakeholders at all levels that must offer this, and CRE provides us with the framework to do so. So what was the progression to CRE? We know that CRE, culturally responsive education, is about more than just inclusive. And throughout history, we've been fighting consistently for this inclusion, whether it's Brownsville versus Board of Ed, or Plessy versus Ferguson, or throughout Texas or California. All these were leading up to the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, and following multiple other lawsuits against, various districts for the exclusion of people, whether by race or by gender or by religion. So all of these were fights towards a form of equality, and CRE plays that role because people cannot devoid themselves of their cultural selves, who they are. It allows for our students to come in wholesome, their whole selves, not exclusive of what needs to be done in school. So in 1935, Brother Du Bois said, two main tenets were required to educate all children. One was a sympathetic touch between teacher and pupil, and a knowledge of the part of the teacher, not simply of the individual taught, but his surrounding and background and the history of his class and group. See, knowledge of self, knowledge of who's in front of you in terms of the students that are in front of us is powerful when we can bring that into the classroom and allow for our students to come with their authentic selves. So champions of multiculturalism, Dr. James Banks is noted as the father of multiculturalism. Dr. Henry Clark and Dr. Adelaide Sanford in 1985, I believe, or prior to that almost, New York City attempted to have a multicultural curriculum. However, that did not succeed in its long-term aspect. That is why we continuously see this argument of CRE, culturally responsive, culturally relevant, culturally sustaining education. Very often they're changing the title, but the premise is still the same: to bring and allow students' culture to come into the classroom as their whole selves. So the importance of CRE lies in this idea that it's a framework for pedagogical practices that recognize the importance of including students' cultural references in all aspects of learning. Now, this quote came out of the revised version of Dream Keepers in 2009. However, Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billing actually presented the Dream Keepers in around 1994. And so here we give credit to the naming of what culturally responsive education is and what it means for us as educators of African-American children to provide to our students. And the fundamental three tenets of culturally responsive is that students must have experience academic success. Dr. Asa Hilliard said, students must have an extraordinary education. And so these are, and by extraordinary experiences in education, that means they show and are able to succeed within these environments. Dr. Ladson Billing also said students must develop and or maintain cultural competence. You see, again, we can't ask our kids to be devoid of who they are when they leave their home and come to our classes in our schools, but that we must enhance and give them not only an opportunity to express and be who they are, but also to learn of another culture and be competent in that environment. And lastly, students must develop a critical consciousness through which they challenge the status quo of the current social order. This is where we are. This is the charge that Majida asked us to take heed as we look back and make sure that we can move forward in this process, especially considering the times that we are living in. So aligned with Dr. Sanford and the Adelaide Sanford Institute's idea, culturally responsive pedagogy is good for all students. It does not imply that students can only learn, but what we do learn from people of diverse culture, but that there is a correlation that is directly linked to racial congruency between the student in the classroom and the teacher that is in front of him. It is not, we can argue, but it is not by accident that our students in public schools, particularly our Black males who represent the highest population of young people in special ed, and the teachers who are before them make up 83 to 85% of white women in the classrooms. So by the time they are assigned to special ed, someone else has taught them and someone else may have placed them there. So another aspect of CRE and its importance is that we must be self-reflective, be willing to develop our skills. College programs are still not addressing some of the conversations that we're having in a real way. It's in hot spots, it's in few places, but I know in certain places this conversation doesn't happen. It doesn't happen when we're talking about ELs. It doesn't happen when we're talking about special ed. And so only what we find is that progressive universities are having these discussions with those that are doing this work consistently. For the Adelaide Sanford Institute, culturally responsive is an intentional understanding of purpose and impact on students of color. It is imperative and critical that we are unapologetic for the work that we're doing for our children. It supports and guides educators to think in new ways to reach all students, particularly those who seem most different, yet it also addresses implicit biases. Now, implicit biases are not just based on race. They're based on status, class, those who are educated, those who are not, and we all have them. But we have to do the work that counters so that we can do the best work for our children and allowing them to enter our spaces and be great. They're already great. We're just enhancing their greatness. And it encourages schools to embrace culturally responsive as a foundation for classroom teaching in schools that intend to serve all students. So the urgency. Now, many of you, we are not far from history that has plagued us, even most recently, January 6th, 2021. The burden of CRE is not of one group. It is the requirement of all of us. It is intended to benefit all if we are to express and hold education systems accountable to us. But like Majida said, it is our right, and it is not for the privileged few. And so we have to act, and not only, we're not asking anymore. We have to do it and say to other people, by any means necessary, we're gonna do for ours what needs to be done, because we can no longer wait. You see, because what happens is that insurrection happens, nooses go up at the Capitol, and then you have teachers putting up slave auction posters to model what slavery was like. This is circa 3 years ago in a district in New Jersey. This was at the University of Arkansas, in which Halloween, he dressed up as blackface, as if that's okay. There is urgency for our work so that students know who they are and they can be as articulate as Malcolm. And for all the doctors in the room right now and those who are not doctors but are educators and who have educated me and all of us in this space, we can no longer wait. So the characteristics of culturally responsive teaching and what does it really look like? So 7 of these principles exist, although there are 3 tenets. And these principles, I only want to focus on 2. The first one is communication of high expectation. And the second one that I will focus on is the student-centered instruction. Communicating high expectations allows our students to see themselves as being able to do the work, regardless of how difficult it is. All students get the same message, are expected to attain high standards. And who delivers those messages? It requires teachers, guidance counselors, administrators, parent coordinators, the custodial staff, the security guard. Everybody in that space is important. So teachers should begin to understand students' behavior in light of the norms of communities in which they have grown as they evaluate their own biases, positionality, and supremacy. Like I said, it's not just based on race. They should respect all students as learners and with valuable knowledge and experience. You know, Paulo Freire said, we don't need a banking system in a way we teach our kids because they already come with assets. So we need to leverage our assets, their assets rather, to involve them and engage them in the classroom setting. And over the 10 months that almost a year now that we've been in remote, some of our students have taken on their own mantle and learned on their own, while others are still a little bit more dependent to learn the aspect of learning on their own. In terms of student-centered instruction, CRE allows the student to enter the classroom as their whole selves, leverage their cultural identity as a tool to engage them towards academic success. That's what we do when we talk about culturally responsive education in the schools that Majida referenced, like Benjamin Banneker and Bedford Academy, because those success rates are still very high. The learning is cooperative, collaborative, and community-oriented. Students are encouraged to direct their own learning and to work with others through research projects, real projects that will change their communities, but are both culturally and socially relevant to them. If they want to write hip hop songs related to what's happened on January 6th as a form of protest, you give them that opportunity because Marvin Gaye talked about the Vietnam War through his songs. Show them how this relates and how they can be just as creative and still be socially and politically astute. More importantly, just as Dr. Jackson wrote, The Pedagogy of Confidence, CRE offers students self-confidence, self-direction, and proactive, and to become proactive. See, what hinders CRE and what can we do? Well, what hinders CRE, we've already spoken. People lacking a knowledge of history, which means that we need to change the curriculum. Some of us may not be familiar with what the pedagogical practices or some of the strategies that would be beneficial and how to incorporate and how to make CRE work. Brother Colon spoke about teacher retention and the testing and the policies and the economics of all of that. Additionally, hiring practices and all the other policies and practices that create a school climate. These are the things that hinders CRE from happening. So then schools then either create climates where they're empowering students or disempowering them in so many ways, and their teachers as well. So the state of mind and practice of culturally responsive educators. It cultivates critical thinking instead of just test-taking skills. Relates academic study to contemporary issues and student experience. You have to be able to allow the students to engage with content with a purpose. It can't be rote memory anymore. It can't be just, okay, I know how to solve a linear equation. What good is it? That's the math reference. It fosters academic, racial, and cultural identities, develops students' ability to connect across cultures, empowers students as agents of social change, and inspires students to fall in love with learning. When I know about myself, ain't nobody can stop me. And yes, I said ain't, but there's no one that can stop me because I know who I am and I know where I can go because I have models. I have people who have gone before me and set the standard. Educators are the purveyors of opportunity and gardens of equity. The goal of undertaking CRE as a professional learning community is to create the optimal environment for students to thrive. I have proof of that. I have documentation of what it looks like when students are in an environment where CRE is taking place, in which they're experiencing academic success, in which they are gaining cultural competence. We can do this. We just have to choose to do it. This young man, just a small snippet of King Thomas More's experience. I will allow this to play for a little bit just so you can get a sense, and then hopefully you can hear it.
King. I know my mom named me that for a reason, but I just don't know why. While I'm trying to find out, my brain hurts from the pressure. I was at the Jazz Cafe for my first book signing of my performance, and it was a really great show, but at the end, I noticed that there weren't any kids at all. All the open mics I've been to were mostly grown-ups, only parents bringing some of their kids. So I asked my mom if there could be more kids. And then she said, well, in the future, maybe we can have more kids. King. People say it's a person that rules someone and lives in a kingdom and is fancy. But I don't think that. I think a king is someone that is kind, not someone that rules someone. Wearing a crown, sitting on your throne, calling your butler. When really that crown is a baseball cap, and that throne is a wooden chair. And your butler is just your friend. I thought up of an open mic, and I wanted it to be just kids, no teenagers. So I thought 12 and under teenagers, they get a lot of stuff. There are a lot of activities for teenagers, but elementary kids, they don't have a lot of activities to do. And it was going to be super cool, so the super cool poetry open mic. On a throne and having a butler doesn't mean you're king. You're a king, you help people. You pick people up when they're falling down. And that is the king that I want to be. I did it at Good Cakes and Bakes. There were a lot of kids showed up, and it was really nice. But I wish kids had bought in poems more. More kids have bought in poems because I had to read mostly on the whole open mic. And recently we had another poetry open mic at the same place, Good Cakes and Bakes. And
So I'm going to stop it here only because you can go directly to his website and watch the rest of it. The point of why I added this into the presentation is because this is the power of what it means for CRE, allowing the students to take their own role in learning and their own positions. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So with that said, allowing for the students to have their own place to present who they are. And that's what CRE is about, allowing our children to come as their whole selves. It's not a choice, it is the obligation of all stakeholders to put all the students first. And for us, I say to put all our students of color, Black and Latinx first. To summarize CRE as a pedagogical practice and framework, there are 3 goals, fundamental goals: student learning and achievement and experience success, affirmation of students' cultural competence, to which not only do they learn and know of themselves, but they are allowed to come as themselves, but to also learn and engage in other cultures. And then finally, to engage in socio-political critical consciousness. Socio-political critical consciousness, not only for the benefit of self, but to critique the inequalities. It is, as James Baldwin said, the very paradox of education, in which the education that they are offered confines them and constricts them, as opposed to being able to revolutionize and be liberated. And so this is where we are, and this is the framework for which we must work from, so that we not only take what we have learned in the past, but we are engaging our students of how they come to us, and then allow them to experience success and developing the critical consciousness, so that we can be comfortable and willing to simply pass the baton for the next generation. Thank you. Over to you, Stacy, as I stop sharing and mute.
I am ready. I don't know if I have anything to add after you gave all of that. I'm just here for the party. So I'm going to share my screen. I know you guys have heard that multiple times this evening. I am going to talk really, really briefly about social emotional learning and cultural responsive education. It goes hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. I know there's sometimes that folks try, and so we're just going to do a quick overview of what that looks like, and something that folks can take away from after they leave here this evening. So what is SEL? What is social emotional learning? Why does it matter? How does it intersect with CRE? And what can we do to promote culturally responsive social emotional learning? And what are your hopes and your dreams for the kids in our community? Just take a moment, think about it, right? We want all of our young people to grow up healthy, happy. That's what we all want for our children. How do we get there? So what is social emotional learning? You guys have to bear with me because I have to move something on my screen. The process through which all children and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. This is what we say we want every day, right? We tell kids we want them to make better choices, to think up things through, to be critical thinkers, to show empathy. We ask of that, but do we show them how to do it? This is what it looks like in some of our schools, right? It has a range of titles. Schools will say we have character development, right? And it's words on a wall. But they're not embodied in the building, they're not embodied in the classroom, they're not culturally relevant. And it's our job is to combine them, to make sense, so students will own them, so families will own them, so schools will own them. All learning is social. All learning is emotional. If you were to stop and think about your favorite educator, what feeling do you get? Right? If you think about that educator that did not treat you well, what feeling do you get? You may associate it with a subject, but there's a feeling tied to that. And that's what we want. We want all of our children to have positive feelings when they're thinking about school, positive feelings when they're thinking about their peers, positive feelings when they're thinking about the people who say they want the best for them. And I think, you know, what everyone has said before, and I think Chris Edmond has also said it well, we want to affirm the brilliance in our children. They come to schools with a variety of brilliance. Some know their brilliance as soon as they walk in the door. Some need to figure it out. Our role is to help them figure it out and affirm it. That's what we need to do. How does this play for equity? It can help create caring, just, inclusive, and healthy communities and support all students in reaching their fullest potential. How do we make it culturally responsive? We include the families. We include the children's voices, right? They are who we serve. So, quick poll, and you should see it on your screen. Is social emotional learning only beneficial to children? Yes or no?
You guys have the ability to vote at the bottom of your screen when it says polling, or is it right in front of you? And panelists, you can vote as well.
And so, Jessica, if you can give me a sense of what the polls say.
Oh, I just saw the results. 96% so far say no, and 4% say yes.
Okay. Well, it's the 96%, right? It is for everyone. It's for everyone. And so what I'm going to quickly say, for some reason, this is why it's important for adults to be social and emotional stable. So take a moment and look at some of those. And think about it. Do we want unhealthy people in front of our children? And I'm not just talking about physical health. I'm talking about social emotional health. So these are my resources. I want people to just think about, because I know we need to move on, is what we can do now is just extend grace, right? Extend grace, extend compassion, extend patience. But before you extend it to someone else, extend it to yourself. Be patient with yourself. Extend grace to yourself. It will reflect on your interactions with our children and our families. And so with that, I thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Stacy, for that segment. And thank you, Dr. Cooney-Lavas, as well. Again, any questions? I see people raising their hands at times. Any questions, you can put it in the Q&A section, and we will share that with the panelists, and we'll make a time to answer those questions. It's hard to, allow the raised hand, allow the talk function in such a big space. So next, we're going to have Ms. Fisher again sharing another brief student segment to hear student voices. And while she's setting that up, I'm going to also remind everyone to follow us on Instagram at Adelaide Sanford Institute. And our Facebook is the Adelaide Sanford Institute. Are you ready, Ms. Fisher? You got to unmute yourself.
think what we talked about being emotional and social, a couple of kids actually addressed that, and it's very interesting. So here's a few more students.
One thing that keeps me motivated is a learning and fun environment. When you have a teacher that loves to engage and always has a pleasant attitude, it comes easy for you to have the same. Also, when you have engaged students in a loving environment, it allows you to have the same environment as well. I personally loved an engaged classroom and a teacher that has a good mindset and always greets people. You are always excited when you have a loving teacher. Some things that make me want to participate a lot is when they are giving extra credit for participation, which does boost up your grade. So I feel like that encourages other classmates and I to participate more in this classroom. And I do feel very comfortable with participating because I feel like if I participate, somebody else will feel more likely to participate. And also, I'm comfortable with my teacher, Miss Fisher, so I will participate here and there. And also, I love sharing out because it gives different perspectives on a question or an answer. For instance, if one classmate has a wrong answer, you can always fill in to tell them where they went wrong. And they can also do the exact same for you when you are in the wrong. So what keeps me engaged during class is basically the idea to have good grades. Regardless of if you like the lesson or not, that is the most important end goal of the situation. What makes me want to participate is usually if I know the answer or I'm confident in myself to respond. Other times it just might be that I want to speak out and just share an idea. And then in terms of advice I would give to make class more interesting, it would just be to do more games that have kids like participate in them. I think that's an easy way to get people to participate because it's like both fun, competitive, and then it also counts toward your grade. So it's like multiple benefits in that. Throughout the course of remote learning, I've experienced different teachers and their teaching styles. Personally, for me, the best teaching style is allowing your students to interact with the lesson and being able to connect with the topic, rather than just giving them a lecture for 20 minutes and making them do group work. Allowing them the chance to do group work on their own at their own pace is better than putting them in a group with each and every assignment, because it allows for them to share what they know rather than share what they don't know. And a great way for this to happen is for them to be able to do a Nearpod lesson for 15 minutes, which is basically just the teacher discussing what the work is for the day and how to do the work for the day. And it also allows the students to answer questions within the lesson and ask their own questions at their own pace. Because it doesn't force them to participate, but rather it gives them a chance to absorb the information, which would make them more comfortable sharing out on a regular basis, rather than having them withhold their information because they're not confident enough to share the information that's relevant to the lesson that they're learning.
So I thank you.
One thing
That seems
that
to
keeps me
be
motivated.
that's it for my session. Those were 3 students who shared out. So I'm finished with that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fisher. That was wonderful. It's always great to hear from students themselves. So next we have Nuamu Grant and Samuel Adewumi, 2 educator practitioners who have been in the game for a minute, so their expertise and wisdom is very valuable, and they're going to share some practices that they are currently doing and have been doing for a while. Are you guys ready?
Yep. Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for having me in this space. It's a beautiful space. The sharing is great, The information is great. And I really, really want to thank everyone who came before me. And that is Sister Majida, Dr. Lavash, and Dr. Haley, because what you have done for me today is just allow me to affirm that a lot of what I'm doing in the classroom is part of the theory and the, the rest of the logic that goes with being in the classroom. So I'm gonna just spend a few minutes just sharing out with you some of the things that I do in my classroom to make it an interesting place for students and to give them the opportunity to learn, grow, develop, and lead, right? So before I start my class, before I start the year, I spend the summer like really, really taking a look at, you know how you prepare for a party? You know how you get yourself, your best smile up on your face, you get the joy energy and the joy juice going. Well, that's what I do with my classes. Before I go into the classroom, I really hype myself up, to bring joy and excitement into the classroom, because what I bring into the classroom is what's going to be reflected back at me. So I'm very, very conscious of the energy state that I bring into my classroom. And as has been said before, is the social emotional state that I'm in, because I know that what I bring in is going to be conveyed to the students and they will give me back what it is that I bring to them. And I want nothing but joy and excitement going on in my classroom. So this is what I bring to it. Okay. The second thing that I do in preparing for my classes is really think about the students. Like, what do I really want from these students? What kind of expectations do I want to set for them? And I actually come in and I set the expectations first, and I set the bar very, very high for them and expect them also to reach that expectation. But of course, you cannot set expectations without lending support, without really, really getting the opportunity to know your students. So the beginning of the school year, I take time out to really focus in on every single student in my classroom. Fortunately for me, I have to say, I work in an independent school, an independent Black school, so I'm not in a public school system. However, I do recognize that I'm talking to a lot of teachers who are in the public school system. So I'm going to try to give you what I'm saying so that you can apply what I'm saying in your classroom as well. But just take time out to say to yourself, every single day, I'm going to get to know something special about every child in the classroom, and select a student you're going to, get information about from, just talk with them in a relaxed manner and get to know them, get to know what they love doing, get to know what they don't love doing, and really understand what their lives are about and what they love. I look for passion and talent in my students, and I drive that passion and talent in everything that I do with them. And then, of course, acknowledge whatever it is that they do. And don't just say you're doing a great job. I specify the actions that they are taking. Like, when you did X, Y, and Z, this was really, really, I'll specify the action, not just you doing great. Now, this is the part where the greatest preparation comes in, and the dedication as a teacher. This is how we demonstrate our dedication to our jobs and to our students and their families. And that is establishing the content that you're going to deliver into the classroom. And I don't just do content in a vacuum. I always establish content with purpose. What do I want at the end of the day? And what I want at the end of the day are two things. I want students who are leaders, and I'm looking for people who are going to prepare to shift the paradigm in the direction that is going to make them feel very valued, and also to allow our cultural purpose to be moved forward. That is like the main goal. So how do I select my materials that I work with? Of course, just like most teachers, we are given a set of textbooks to work from. Now, I have always felt very, very restricted by textbooks. And I can't even imagine how restricted my students must feel, having to open up a textbook and read from page to page and follow the text. I do not do that. My textbook becomes one of the many resources that I use in my classroom. It is a resource material. So what do I spend my summer doing? looking at what is in the textbook and specifically what is missing from the textbook. So I'm following the guidelines and the protocols of, the Board of Ed, the Department of Education. We're following state standards. We're following all of that. And we're using the textbooks that the school supplies us with. But I'm not going from cover to cover in my textbook, nor is my textbook my only resource. Now, it'd be really easy for me to just, follow the textbook, do the little lessons and questions at the end of the text. It's a lot of hard work and preparation, and I do my prep during the summer months as much as I can. Recognizing that my textbook is going to be a resource rather than the major source that I'm using. And then what I do with that textbook is I create lesson planning that is going to bring life to the text. So a lot of my work is dramatic presentations. I give them the lesson and I'm like, okay, so you are this character, you are this character, you are that character within the text of this topic that we are studying. And now let's dramatize it, let's act it out. So you can feel and get a feel of what life was like for people during those times. But I have another purpose in mind. And that bigger purpose that I have in mind is that students are going to do a final project before the school year is over. And usually my final project will be one where students have to create a dramatic presentation about whatever topic they as a group want to cover, what struck them most out of the whole class, year-long class. Of course, I'm telling them throughout the year, this is what you need to think about for our end of year project. What I have the students do is decide on the area in history that they want to cover, number one. Two, they become the script writer. They become the person who is going to be the wardrobe person. They are going to be the set person. They're going to be doing lighting. They're handling the mics. They are training students in the dramatic presentation of it. I let them handle it, carry it themselves, and then we deliver it to an audience of parents and family members and the entire school body at a closing event. This is what makes history real for them. This is what brings it to life. And this allows them to engage. And they also are charged with rewriting the history. I don't want to just see a reenactment of the I Have a Dream speech. I do not just want to see a reenactment of Malcolm X's most amazing speeches. I do not want that. I want you to come in and you are going to create your own world. And in that world that you create, you're bringing in your understanding of the historical context of us as a Black people, and with the understanding that it is us who drive the Constitution of the United States and make democracy real. That's pretty much my lesson.
Thank you, Norm. Sam, we're going to transition to Sam Adewumi now.
And my role here is just to share some of the practices that we have at CAS Prep that we believe really lead to student engagement and also to CRE. So just a second, just in terms of what CAS Prep is, we're a community-based organization. We do supplementary education and enrichment programs for children in our community. We also do provide test prep for specialized high school tests, which is actually how we started, and then we began to expand into other grades. And so right now we service students from grade 3 up to grade 9. So we have this program called Community Building Time. And community building time, it's our means of providing social and emotional learning and culturally relevant education to our students at the very beginning of class. Um, so just a little bit in terms of the history and the origin of CBT for us. So CBT is actually derived from the yoga practice of setting an intention before every practice. This intention varies from what you may want for yourself in the practice to what you may want to see in the world. And so it sets the framework for what you're about to do. And so when we created CBT, it was around that context of setting a framework for what we wanted our students to experience in that particular day.
Sam, can you rewind just 2 seconds what you said? Because we lost your sound for a second. So the last statement you made?
Okay, in terms of, so in terms of CBT, it's really about allowing students or provide students an opportunity to set a framework for what they want to experience throughout the day, as well as giving them um, some fodder for that. Um, so in terms of some additional purposes of CBT, as we began to really develop it and see what we could do with it, it helps us, and again, it helps us set the intention and purpose for our day's work. It also helps us develop an overall purpose for engaging in learning. So sometimes students are like, why do we need to learn this? And some of the things that we highlight and showcase in CBT, again, provide students an ability to see why what we're doing and what we're engaging in is actually important. Um, Especially in this time of COVID, it allows us to build community. And we do engage all our students from all the different grade levels together, and you'll see that soon. We do support our students in helping them develop public speaking skills and also having comfort amongst each other. So we help them build like friendships, even in through this Saturday-based program. Um, some other things that happen is we provide students with a space to articulate their thoughts and perspectives. Big part of what we believe in is the cultural relevancy and historical information that we provide them with that we know they do not receive in many other settings from school and even from home. It helps develop community and personal pride as they learn of their history and develop critical thinking and analysis skills. And at the end of the day, our goal is to develop students who recognize and appreciate the resistance and resiliency of our ancestors and begin to see themselves within the context of our struggle as a community. So it's not just about being proficient in, let's say, math or ELA, it's for what purpose, right? And what are we going to do for our community as we become proficient in these things? So before we before COVID, well, we had CBT, and we would just pretty much gather the whole program in one large area. We would speak for a few minutes to some aspect of either cultural, historical, or community-based issues. We would have a word of the day. Sometimes we would generate it. Sometimes the students would generate it, and we would have a positive affirmations that students would dismiss from class. Usually, we would say, you know we can do difficult things. So that became the mantra for the program. And that would last anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. Now, in our virtual version, we kind of took a look at what we were doing and say, hey, how can we take advantage of the fact that we're now virtual? What are some other things that we can do? And so CBT now starts actually 30 minutes before official class time. So officially we start at 10:10. Let's say during the school year, we start our Saturday program starts at 10:10. Our CBT starts at 9:40. And I will say that by 9:45, 9:50, the majority of students are there. Matter of fact, we have students who are waiting at the Zoom door before 9:40 to get let into the class. What we usually start, so CBT now starts with what we have a curated video presentations that speak to whatever theme of the day or of the month. And then we will engage in a whole group discussion afterwards. And then this discussion will continue on in the classes, usually in ELA classes. And we expect written reflections at the end of each month from the students around the theme of CBT for that particular month. As we've developed CBT, we've also come up with the concept of having monthly themes. And so for February, our monthly theme was um, the spirit of activism. And so what we did was we highlighted and showcased activism in different arenas. One week, the first week, we had our entertainers, and we showcased Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, several Tupac. Then the following week, we had our athletes. I'm going to show you what that looked like in a second. And then this coming week, we will have our influencers. Um, and this coming week, I don't have a link next to that because this coming week, our students are actually producing the CBT for this particular week. For Women's History Month, we're going to focus on our leaders and pioneers in science and technology. So, just in terms of what those video presentations look like, um, again, there'll be a collage of different videos that speak to whatever the theme of that particular day is. So, this was the last week before we left out. We took a look at Jesse Owens, um, and what he did in terms of the Olympics, and the videos that we chose always speak to social and cultural issues, and so it addressed, the whole issue of him in Germany and Hitler and so forth. Then we did show some videos of Muhammad Ali actually in the ring, but then we followed that up also with him speaking to his refusal to go to war and acknowledging the fact that he recognized that his enemies were here on this side of the world versus going over to the other side to for people that had never bothered him. Then we moved on and watched a short clip about the brothers who raised their fist at the Olympics, and they explained what they did and why they did it, and what each thing that they wore, what it represented. Then from there, we moved a little bit more modern day, and we watched a few clips of Naomi actually playing a match, so the kids could actually see her, and then a short interview where she spoke to her activity with Black Lives Matter this past summer. Then again, we went back to Dr. J because again, most students don't know about him, and we felt he was important. And then we came back and ended with LeBron, and his he spoke to some of his issues around athletes being more than athletes in this day. That athletes have a voice and they have platforms, and they can speak for the community or to the community in terms of the needs and the problems. And so once we finish with the video presentation, we will always have a short discussion. So I do want to show you a short clip of one of our CBTs, and this was for the 23rd. This was the the weekend after inauguration. So for that particular video presentation, we showed Kamala Harris taking the oath. Then she had a speech later on that evening that we showed, and then we also showed Amanda Gorman reading a poem prior to the inauguration poem, and then we also showed the inauguration poem. So this was the video presentation for that day, and then we actually went into discussion from that point. So, all right. So, so at this point, we've just kind of opened up CBTs a minute into it, and we've shown the video presentations, and we're kind of opening the floor to anyone in the program to to speak to any thoughts or comments that they had based on the video presentations or just that particular week's occurrence. Yeah, just jump in.
Okay, cool. So this week was very memorable because it was such an important inauguration that we actually watched it during school, and my mom had it in the background at home. So I go to a Quaker school, so we have this thing called meeting for worship. So during history and meeting for worship and partially lunch, we were just watching the whole thing.
Nice. What thoughts, what emotions came up for you?
I just felt very proud that someone different from a lot of other people so is actually in office. Like Kamala Harris, she's black, she's Asian American. So knowing that she's different in so many ways against people like Mike Pence or someone like even George Washington, the first president, he was white and a man. So
Mm,
knowing that people of our skin color
mm,
and people of the opposite gender can do these things, it just motivates me to do the things
amazing.
I know I can do.
Amazing. Thank you, Josiah. Anyone else?
I have some thoughts.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Well, I think that I think I watched the inauguration in class during like I think my social studies period, and I had it in the background too. And I think that this was a very important time for the U.S. because Kamala Harris, she's Asian American and Black, and I think this should motivate all girls of any skin color that they could do anything they put their minds to. And I think that our and Joe Biden, he's committed to making our country great and to maybe fix the mistakes that Trump made. So that also motivates me that I could do anything I put my mind to, and to my sisters because they're girls too, that they can accomplish anything if they put their minds to
Uh, Thank you, Dylan. Thank you. Anyone else?
Um, I would just like to say that us as children right now, we're living through history. This is something that movies, books, could be written about or made about this
Mm,
past year or two. I mean, the coronavirus, a worldwide pandemic, a capital break-in hasn't happened since 1840.
mm,
Um, and of course, the controversy between Trump and Biden and the riots and all and things like that. And new people that were minorities are coming into office, things like that. This is revolutionary. So I feel like we're living through history right now as children.
thank you, Brandon. I've only heard the brothers this morning. What's going on with my sisters out there?
I'll say something. Yeah, it just brought me like really great joy to see that there's finally someone holding the presidency that doesn't care what race you are, your gender, your sexual orientation. Like he actually cares for all of us. And I'm really excited about what he's going to do. He's already at work getting things done. So I'm really proud of that. And to see a Black woman as vice president, never would people have thought that a Black woman could be vice president or get to that high status. So like me as a young Black girl, I really feel motivated by that. Like it's the best, most like refreshing feeling ever to just like
Okay. So that was just a few minutes of our CBT. Again, it kind of continues for a few more minutes. And then when the students leave us and go into their regular classes, they do pick up on the discussion in smaller segments. Um, let's see. So in terms of our next steps as we're developing, this CBT idea, was to have student developed and led presentations and discussions. And I will say this, the student, as I said earlier, the students are actually, our seventh grade students are actually leading this particular weekend CBT. And going into their classes while they were planning for this, you can see it was just amazing to see the level of discussion that they were having as they were making choices about who they wanted to feature, what about those people did they want to have come out, debating which particular videos they wanted to show, as well as even who um, who they wanted to show. So it was just very a very empowering experience for them to actually be like fully in control of something that they know is very important to our program. Um, so in terms of some of the next things that we want to do is we want to have them eventually choose the monthly theme and roll out a whole month's program. And then in terms of our culminating activity, this will be the second time we've done it, but we believe in spoken word. And so we have a program-wide spoken words in our CBT at the end of the sessions. The last one that we had lasted for over 2 hours, and it only ended because we had to move on to other things. The students were so engaged and wanted to go a second time, a third time to share their work with each other and with the audience. That's it.
Thank you, Sam and Duamu. That was amazing. Hearing from students, hearing those practical solutions that people could take straight back to their schools right away and implement. Thank you all for staying tuned for so long. We went a little longer than we expected, and we wanted to respect your time, but thank you for sharing your evening with us. And to close out, I want to introduce the director of the Adelaide Sanford Institute, Christopher Smith. He's got some last announcements, and I want to thank all our panelists. He's going to continue to thank them. Chris?
Okay, let's give the panelists a round of applause. They did an awesome job. Thank you for sharing all that great information. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to give a special thank you to Jessica Yaraka, one of our dedicated ASI members, and her team. Job well done. But for the panelists and the audience, there's a couple things that I want us not to forget from tonight. We want to make sure that we bring the lived experiences and the culture of our kids in our classrooms every day. We want to be intentional about what we do because we're going to be unapologetically, you know what I'm saying, unapologetically Black. We're going to teach our history. And like Sister Lavash said, we can no longer wait. So let's get to work. Follow ASI on Facebook, on Instagram, on our website. There will be more presentations to come. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you, guys. You guys are awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all
Thank you,
for
guys.
all your hard work. Jessica, you did it.
Thank you. No, you all did it. You all did it. You guys are awesome. So I'm going to close out now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.